Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra. Market Mantra.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome to this edition of Market Mantra, the program in which we give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. I'm S. Rangabashyam, and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Manoj Pathak.
नमस्कार, मार्केट मंत्र के ताजा अंक में आपका स्वागत है। आधे घंटे के इस कार्यक्रम में हमेशा की तरह हम देश और दुनिया की चुनी हुई कारोबारी, आर्थिक और शेयर बाजार से संबंधित ताजा खबरों को लेकर हाजिर हैं। हमारे साथ खबरों पर ऑनलाइन चर्चा के लिए आमंत्रित हैं आर्थिक मामलों के जाने माने विश्लेषक जयंतु दास। जयंतु, नमस्कार, कार्यक्रम में आपका स्वागत है।
शुक्रिया मनोज। हेलो रंगा।
आइए शुरुआत करते हैं अंग्रेजी में हेडलाइन से, जिसे लेकर मौजूद हैं एस रंगाभाष्यम।
Thank you, Manoj. The top stories. Key domestic indices end on a positive note in a highly volatile session. Sensex closes above 61,800 level, while Nifty settles above 18,300 points. Rupee closes at 82 rupees and 74 paise against the US dollar. And Brent crude prices hover around $76.95 per barrel.
घरेलू शेयर बाजार में उतार चढ़ाव के बीच हुए कारोबार में बहुत के साथ बंद हुए प्रमुख सूचकांक सेंसेक्स 61,800 के स्तर से ऊपर उठकर हुआ बंद। निफ्टी 18,300 के स्तर को पार कर गया। अंतर बैंकिंग विदेशी मुद्रा बाजार में रुपया $1 की तुलना में 82 रुपये 74 पैसे पर बंद हुआ और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बाजारों में ब्रेंट कच्चे तेल की कीमत $76.95 प्रति बैरल के आसपास पहुंची। घरेलू शेयर बाजार में आज तेज उतार चढ़ाव देखने को मिला। आमतौर पर बिकवाली का रुख ही मुख्य रूप से बाजार में था, लेकिन कारोबार के अंतिम चरण में अच्छी खासी लिवाली की गई और आखिरकार बढ़त के साथ बंद हुए दोनों प्रमुख सूचकांक। सेंसेक्स 61,800 के ऊपर बंद हुआ, जबकि निफ्टी 18,300 के स्तर को पार कर गया। बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का सेंसेक्स कारोबार के अंत में 99 अंक यानी 0.16% की बढ़त लेकर 61,873 पर बंद हुआ। उधर नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का निफ्टी 36 अंक यानी 0.2% बढ़कर 18,321 दर्ज हुआ। विस्तारित बाजार की ओर चलें तो छोटी और मझोली कंपनियों का प्रदर्शन सेंसेक्स और निफ्टी पैक की तुलना में थोड़ा बेहतर रहा। बीएसई मिड कैप इंडेक्स में 0.4% की वृद्धि हुई, जबकि स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स 0.3% लाभ के साथ बंद हुआ।
Well, as Manoj just mentioned, the domestic benchmark indices ended today on a positive note in a highly volatile session. The Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange closed above 61,800 points, while the Nifty at the National Stock Exchange settled above 18,300 level. Both indices rose amid negative cues from the global share market. The Sensex appreciated 99 points or 0.16% to finish at 61,873. The Nifty also climbed 36 points or 0.2% to end at 18,321. In the broader market at the BSE, the mid-cap index added 0.4% and the small-cap index was up by 0.3%. In the Sensex pack, out of 30 companies, shares of 15 companies appreciated while the rest declined. Bharti Airtel was the top gainer as it climbed 2.75%, followed by ITC, which gained 1.75%, and Kotak Bank rose 1.2%. On the other hand, Wipro declined 1.35% and Tata Motors fell 1.1%. HDFC and Sun Pharma both tumbled 0.8% each. In sectoral indices at the BSE, 16 sectors logged gains while 4 witnessed losses. Telecommunication sector climbed 1.7% and realty gained 1.1%. Capital goods and FMCG both rose 0.7% each, while services sector appreciated by 0.65%. On the other hand, metal sector fell 0.1%, while energy sector slipped 0.06%. The overall market breadth was positive as shares of 1,875 companies rose while that of 1,615 companies declined. However, 121 companies remained unchanged. And to talk about the stock markets, Jayanto, what would you say? Don't you think there's some kind of a resistance at the 62,000 mark for the Sensex and 18,400 level for the Nifty?
Well, I think you're partly right. But if you look at the bigger picture, it's just not a simple case of resistance in that sense, because the headroom to grow further from here, facing severe headwinds, both from the global market as well as from the domestic recent news which is happening. In today's market, if you look very closely, the final last-minute recovery was led by typically auto sector as well as FMCG. Now, sectorally, I believe FMCG also would be facing severe headwinds for the next 2 to 3 months. And my belief for the reason is basically because of the fact that June, July, August is typically the time when the monsoons happen in India. And the monsoons direct as well as shape a lot of sectors, including the agricultural sector, which is typically contributing 30% to the GDP and has almost half the workforce over there. So the initial reports in April on the monsoon part was it was supposed to be normal to a little below the normal at 98% levels. Now there is a predominant news story of the El Nino factor coming into the month of June, and that's going to slash down the rainfall expectations by almost 10%, which is at 90% levels. So I think these are news which would create headwind until we get to know what exactly the status and shape is. But as I said, in addition to this, there's obviously the international headwinds in terms of what's happening in the U.S., in terms of the debt ceiling and things like that, those stories. But taking categorically out, if you take these factors out, I think the market now needs some external stimuli. The interest rates would be one. But if RBI, in the next meeting comes out even with a neutral outlook to some extent, I think that would give in some sort of a stimuli to the investing markets.
आइए नजर डालते हैं रुपए की स्थिति पर। अंतर बैंकिंग विदेशी मुद्रा बाजार में $1 की तुलना में रुपया आज 82 रुपये 74 पैसे पर बंद हुआ। उधर दुनिया की 6 प्रमुख मुद्राओं की तुलना में डॉलर की स्थिति दर्शाने वाला सूचकांक अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में समाचार तैयार किए जाने तक 104.09 पर चल रहा था। जैन, तो बाजार में यदि हम आज की गतिविधि देखें तो आखिरी मोमेंट में यानी लगभग 3 बजे के आसपास से खरीदारी का सिलसिला देखने को मिला। उससे पहले बाजार का टोन लगभग थोड़ा सा बिकवाली जैसा रुख दिख रहा था। आखिरी चरण में जो खरीदारी की गई उसके पीछे कोई खास कारण रहे हों?
देखिए, एक तो एफएनओ एक्सपायरी में हमेशा मार्केट बहुत वॉलेटाइल होता है। हम सबको पता है कि एफएनओ को स्क्वायर ऑफ करना पड़ता है ट्रेड जोन, जिस वजह से मार्केट को बहुत प्रभाव होता है। लेकिन जैसे मैंने कहा, कुछ बार्गन हंटिंग बेशक आखिरी आधा एक घंटे में हुआ है, जहाँ पे शायद निवेशकों को लगा कि खास करके एफएमसीजी का स्टॉक हो या ऑटो सेक्टर का स्टॉक हो, मूल तौर से सेंसेक्स में थोड़ा सा इज्जत वापस ले आए आखिरी के दौर से। तो उनको लगा शायद इसमें कुछ वैल्यू बाइंग हो सकता है, जिस वजह से इन निवेशकों ने जाके अलग से निवेश किए हैं इस क्षेत्र में। बट ओवरऑल अगर आप ब्रॉड ट्रेंड देखें मार्केट में, अगर आप एफएनओ हटा दें, क्योंकि एफएनओ क्लोजर हर दिन तो होते नहीं है जी, मार्केट को इस वक्त आगे एक दिशा के लिए बहुत जरूरी है 3-4 मूल तौर से कुछ न कुछ ऐसे घटनाएं हो या कुछ न कुछ खबर हो जिसका वजह से या जिसका बलबूते से या जिसका नीम के ऊपर भरोसा करके मार्केट आगे बढ़े। राइट, वो बहुत जरूरी है समझना। क्या
Yeah. And Jayanto, earlier you spoke about the monsoon and the El Nino effect. As predictions are there, 98% of the LPA, the long period average. But, critics and analysts also point out that, rather than the quantity, the quality is also important. That means the distribution of rainfall and the monsoon is equally important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we have seen above average monsoons in India, in the Indian subcontinent, with very skewed distribution leading to floods in some areas and droughts in other areas, despite the overall figures were supposed to be above average. So this also doesn't augur well, obviously. But then, Ranga, the question of distribution comes in when you have enough rainfall to distribute. It's certainly an important factor. I mean, no one is writing it off. But as I said, if the overall bucket of rainfall expected, is to be drastically down by around 10% than what's expected because of the El Nino effect, I obviously believe, just very briefly for our listeners, El Nino is typically a pattern which develops on the Eastern Pacific region that focuses and finally disturbs the southwest monsoon wind that leads to better monsoons for India. So that's a very brief explanation of what the El Nino effect will be. It doesn't come every year. It happens on the Eastern Pacific Ocean, and as I said, the last one brought in droughts in many pockets of India. So hopefully, as I said, we should be able to sail through this because we also had in the last decade where food grain exports had to be stopped or at least paused for a while because of concerns about the production in agriculture. So let's see this year what it brings in. But as I said, overall, completely agree with you. The distribution of rainfall is also an equally important part to actually speak of rains bringing in an extremely good agricultural sector growth.
जैन, तो एक और जहां अल नीनो के कहने के आसार दिख रहे हैं, पूरी दुनिया में देखे जा रहे हैं, वहीं अपने यहाँ उम्मीद है कि इस बार भी जो अनाजों का उत्पादन होगा वह अपेक्षाकृत ठीक रहेगा। रिकॉर्ड उत्पादन की बातें की जा रही हैं, जो आरंभिक अनुमान आए हैं और जो वर्तमान जमीन के स्तर की स्थितियां हैं उसमें। वैसे में एफएमसीजी सेक्टर के भविष्य को लेकर पूरे साल भर का यदि हम आकलन करके चलें तो कैसा दिख रहा है? आज भी हम थोड़ी सी यानी लगभग 0.7% की बढ़त देख रहे हैं इसमें।
देखिए, एफएमसीजी सेक्टर में मेरा इस वक्त दो विषय पे अलग से मेरा अलग कंसर्न है बारे में बात करें। एक तो ये है कि अगले 2 तिमाही अगर जैसे आपने कहा कि घरेलू बाजार में एग्रीकल्चरल प्रोडक्शन उसका अगर रफ्तार ठीक ठाक रहे, स्तर ठीक ठाक रहे, तो बेशक उसका कहीं ना कहीं जाके डिमांड में ट्रांसलेट होता है। और हमने देखे है कि बिल्कुल अक्टूबर नवंबर जब फेस्टिवल सीजन इंडिया में चालू होता है, एक एफएमसीजी प्रोडक्ट्स हो या व्हाइट गुड सेक्टर्स में एक अच्छा खासा ग्रोथ आता है। और दूसरा जो कंसर्न है मेरा वो ये रहा कि ओवरऑल एफएमसीजी एज अ परफॉर्मेंस जिस तरह का उम्मीद किया जा रहा था इंडिया में एक एग्रेसिव ग्रोथ होना चाहिए कोविड के बाद, बेशक वापस जरूर है कि एफएमसीजी हैज लेड द वे टू सम एक्सटेंट। एफएमसीजी स्टॉक्स में सेक्टर्स में कुछ विशेष एरिया में खास करके मंथली बेसिस पे बहुत अच्छा ग्रोथ हुआ है। आई मीन देयर इज नो डिनाइंग द फैक्ट दैट एफएमसीजी इज अ सेक्टर नॉट टू लुक फॉरवर्ड टू और इट्स बीन अ बोरिंग सेक्टर विद नॉट वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग रिटर्न। लेकिन ओवरऑल जैसे आपने कहा मनोज, ये दो कंसर्न्स मेरे पास मूल तौर से है कि जैसे परफॉर्मेंस को उम्मीद किया जा सकता है एफएमसीजी सेक्टर में, उस तरह से परफॉर्मेंस वापस नहीं आया है।
Yeah. Jayanta, we are discussing the triggers for the markets to go on to the next level. Obviously, inflation is key to it. We have seen in the last monetary policy review, the Reserve Bank of India, kept the interest rates unchanged. And now we already have the signals. The inflation rate has, come down substantially. So in the next monetary policy review coming up in the first week of June, again it will be a hold again, isn't it? Or there could be some change, or could be a surprise of a downward revision of 25 basis points.
I actually let me quote the RBI governor. I mean, quote is a wrong word, but let me just restate what he had said, I guess, yesterday in CII, and that is, he says it's not in his hands, obviously, to tinker with the rate of interest. It's what the market dynamics speak of. And I think as of today, we would see even a neutral stance by the Monetary Policy Committee, which decides on where the rate of interest should go, would augur quite well for the existing businesses. We are not even speaking this early of a downsize of 25 basis points and things like that. Even a neutral stance by RBI would be enough. That's the actual economic story. Now, if you look forward for the next 1 year, we have an election year in 2024, and there should have been enough headroom in the next 8-9 months to tinker on the rate of interest. And obviously, I'm not telling the tinker on the rate of interest keeping a political objective in mind, but what I'm telling is, given our economic pattern, the tendency of any particular body would be, at this point of time, since we're at peak levels, the tendency of the rate of interest going down from here is a much more prevalent tendency than going up. And this prevalent tendency would also see some sort of, culmination into where the elections are. One wouldn't like to have elections in a country with huge high interest rates and the growth rates, to that extent crumbling. So those wouldn't be a scenario where the elections will be fought. And that's how typically the economic cycle also tends to follow, the election 5-yearly cycle.
जयंतु, यदि हम इसी सूत्र को पकड़ के आगे बढ़ना चाहें और अपने आम जो श्रोता हैं, जो हमारे सुनने वाले निवेशक हो सकते हैं, उनको यदि सलाह देना चाहें तो इलेक्शन ईयर यानी 2024 का होगा, लेकिन उसमें लगभग 8 से 9 महीने या 10 महीने के आसपास समय है। तो इस अवधि के लिए किस सेक्टर को उछलता हुआ या अपेक्षाकृत देख रहे हैं कि जहां पर बढ़त के आसार हमारे निवेशकों की दृष्टि से हो सकते हैं?
देखिए, पिछले कई प्रोग्राम में मैं हमेशा खास करके खुदरा निवेशकों के लिए ये सलाह रहा
जी,
इस वक्त भी मैं वही सलाह दूंगा इस वक्त। वो ये है कि जिन्होंने एफडीज में इन्वेस्ट करना चाहता है, शायद उनके लिए ये आखिरी तिमाही है, अगले 2-3 महीना, जहां पे जाके आप अपना पूंजी जाके निवेश करें, बिकॉज इसके बाद ब्याज दर यहाँ से गिरने वाला है। अगर आप उम्मीद कर रहे हैं कि 0.5% या 1% और यहाँ से बढ़ोतरी हो, बेशक नहीं होगा। और जिनका इच्छा है कि भाई मैं एफडी में पैसा रखना चाहता हूँ, अगले 1-1.5 साल में मेरे को 8-8.5% कुछ बैंक दे रहा है, 7.5% ज्यादातर बैंक दे रहा है 15 महीने का अवधि के लिए। तो ऐसे अगर आपका सिचुएशन है, इट्स एन एक्सट्रीमली गुड अपॉर्चुनिटी टू गो एंड इन्वेस्ट। डोंट वेट बियॉन्ड दिस पॉइंट, बिकॉज इससे ज्यादा मैं नहीं मानता हूँ कि बैंक से आपको उम्मीद हो सकता है ज्यादा ब्याज दरों का। एक तो सलाह ये है। दूसरा सलाह ये है कि विदेशी बाजारों का गतिविधि के ऊपर नजर रखते हुए आप अपना घरेलू बाजार में निवेश हमेशा थोड़ा आवश्यक करें। हालांकि ज्यादातर निवेशकों को यूएस मार्केट में जो पूरी तरह से प्रोफेशनली इसके साथ जुड़े हुए नहीं है, यूएस मार्केट के ऊपर शायद वो उतना ध्यान नहीं देता, घरेलू बाजारों के ऊपर देखते हैं। लेकिन मैं मानता हूं, और ये बात मैंने आज नहीं पिछले 6 महीने से कह रहा हूं, कि जून जुलाई एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट इन्फ्लक्स ग्लोबल मार्केट में आने वाला है। और नवंबर दिसंबर पिछले साल तक जितना भी रिपोर्ट्स आया है, सबने 1% के करीब ग्लोबल डाउनटर्न का बात किया है। तो वो समझ के आप बेशक निवेश करें।
Yeah. Jayantu, let's quickly do a mini review kind of a thing of the economy and the macroeconomic fundamentals. We have spoken about inflation, which is, moving downwards, really benign at this point in time. Crude oil, despite the geopolitical tensions, is somewhat stable, below that mark of $80 per barrel. And also, the forex scenario is fairly good. Rupees hovering around that 82 rupees to a dollar mark. We have a substantial reserve of foreign exchange. All these, factors, don't you think augur well for the economy and, could give a push to the stock market as well?
Well, I think you have flagged the right signals at this point of time in terms of where our economy is, in terms of, the robustness of our present economy. And I would also like to add, in addition to what you said, is how, all our regulators as well as the present government have been managing factors. Of course, there are challenges. There are challenges to seek in terms of employment to be increased in this particular country from the present levels and things like that. But those are typically challenges which have been remaining for a period and has been fluctuating with economic cycles. But having said so, what's important to understand is, which all of us know, but let me just still repeat, we are surely not insulated from what the global scenario is. If you look at what is happening in the U.S., if the discussions on managing the debt ceiling are not coming to a conclusive end, U.S. might go bankrupt. And in that case, what happens is immediately 8 to 10% of the U.S. GDP growth gets wiped off with businesses closing down, loss of jobs happening, huge rise in the rate of interest, and that could trigger a domino effect globally because most of the global forex reserves, as you know, are all in dollar denomination. So those factors are equally important to understand and are at play and can create havoc in the domestic market despite your strong forex reserves, despite your strong macro parameters at this point of evaluation. So we just can't write off that. Now, when I'm speaking of this particular issue of negotiation of the U.S. debt ceiling, what's important to understand at this point of time is two things. One is it's a case of who batters the eyelid first at this point of time between the Democrats and the Republicans and the discussions which are going there. in a small manner to explain to most of our listeners, they have been obviously in the last few days listening and reading a lot about this particular issue of how debt ceiling can be causing a concern. What's the debt ceiling basically? The whole idea is debt ceiling is typically the amount of borrowing the U.S. Treasury can do to fund its expenses as also meet its overall obligation when it's giving back interest and when it's borrowing money. So now this was breached in Jan. The U.S. economy has a total of around $30+ trillion of debt which it has to service. What happens is the Congress keeps on giving permission for the government to borrow more, and it has a limit. Now, once that limit is breached, the government either has to go to increase the limit, which is a natural way, but it has to be voted by the House.
Yeah.
The Republicans play a crucial role. Or the other option is, which obviously a lot of our listeners would ask, that given June 1st is the deadline, what happens when the debt ceiling, say for example, doesn't move beyond this? So in that case, the government goes in for some extraordinary measures, which are typically putting the economy into an ICU and with some life-saving support, expecting that something good will happen and that patient will be out of that life-saving support.
Yeah, but Jayanta, do you think it's so such a simple thing that the entire economy, the entire country, the biggest economy in the world would simply let go of this situation and make a default in the month of June, and then have a cascading impact not only on that particular country, US, but on the entire world? Don't you think something or the other will come up? Still, we have time, almost 6-7 days. Don't you think something will come up?
Why would an economy as large and robust as the size of the US would allow, a debt default to happen, leading
exactly
to effect globally? But then politics always goes in a different way than economic prudence. And as I said, it's not that easy. The discussion on this particular debt ceiling has been a long drawn discussion which has been going on for decades. Obviously, the problems of the debt ceiling issue have been more prominent in the last 10 to 15 years in the U.S. economy. This is certainly not the first time that the U.S. is staring just 5-6 days away from such a situation.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone at the back of the mind believes that, okay, they will not let that happen. But then there's also a story of a political gamemanship which takes place parallelly in such situations. So let's see and understand how it rolls out. But obviously, we are not looking forward to. But it has had an impact in the U.S. market. It is also having a broad impact with these dark clouds hovering over the international markets. People are losing money through falling market capitalization in the last 2-3 days. Let's understand that.
आइए अब चर्चा को ले चलें वैश्विक बाजारों की ओर। सबसे पहले एशियाई शेयर बाजार, जहां आज जापान को छोड़कर अन्य सभी प्रमुख बाजारों में बिकवाली तेज रही। सूचकांक 2 महीने के न्यूनतम स्तर पर लुढ़क गए। अमेरिका में डेट सीलिंग की चर्चाओं को लेकर जोखिम वाले शेयरों में आज एशियाई शेयर बाजारों में बिकवाली तेज रही। दूसरी ओर जापान में निवेशकों की लिवाली से निक्केई 225 सूचकांक 0.4% लाभ के साथ बंद हुआ। बिकवाली के दबाव में चीन के शंघाई कंपोजिट इंडेक्स में 0.1% की गिरावट हुई। हांगकांग का हिंग सेंग 2% लुढ़क गया। सिंगापुर के स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स इंडेक्स में 0.2% की कमी आई। दक्षिण कोरिया का कोस्पी लगभग 0.5% घाटे के साथ बंद हुआ। यूरोपीय जोन की ओर चलें तो वहां भी समाचार तैयार किए जाने तक बिकवाली चल रही थी। अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में लंदन का FTSE 100 और फ्रांस का CAC 40 दोनों 0.27% नुकसान में थे, जबकि जर्मनी के डैक्स में 0.12% की गिरावट दिखने को मिल रही थी।
On to the American markets now. European markets closed lower yesterday and the Dow fell for the 4th consecutive day, with the market sentiment rattled by stumbling US debt ceiling talks. The Nasdaq Composite Index plunged 0.6%, the S&P 500 declined 0.75%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.8%. Let's move on and take a look at the oil scenario. Oil prices fell today after Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak played down the prospect of further OPEC Plus production cuts at its meeting next week. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading at $76.95 per barrel, whereas West Texas Intermediate was trading at $72.88 per barrel when reports last came in. A quick comment on the oil prices, Jayanto.
Well, Ranga, in terms of oil, I always felt that the chances of oil falling down from here much more than rising up. That's the first part. However, the Saudi, conglomerate in that sense, the Saudi government body, the Prince specifically, has made some comment on the oil prices and the oil reserves, which has been forecasting a very, a much more than optimistic, happy scenario for oil prices from here on. So, understanding the way they play the oil game globally, I wouldn't be sure at this point of time, where the oil prices would be heading from here. But as I said, keeping the overall view of where the economies and global economies are heading and the demand for oil, I believe the chances of oil prices softening from here are much more than rising from here.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll agree that in the last couple of months, our domestic prices haven't changed for petrol and diesel. Do you think now it's time for the government to sit up and take notice and maybe on cheaper imports from Russia, kind of revise the domestic prices as well?
See, as I said, if the interest rates are at these levels, I think for the government it will be an important tool to somehow tinker on the oil prices and see to it that they bring in some sort of a, comfort to the overall economic growth. But then, as I said, these are tools which are kept to be used for the next 12 months, without sounding too politically inclined on my comment. Then, as I said, it's important to understand where and how the economic parameters can be used to ensure that there is some sort of a comfort being driven into the overall space of how the economy would be working for the next 12 months. Oil prices would be one important factor. Rate of interest would be a second important factor. And of course, in addition to that, the optics of having a good economic prudent management, which obviously the government and every government has been trying.
आइए चलें सराफा बाजार। मल्टी कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज में अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में समाचार तैयार किए जाने तक जून में आपूर्ति किए जाने वाले सोने का मूल्य 37 रुपए बढ़त के साथ 59,897 रुपए प्रति 10 ग्राम के आसपास चल रहा था, लेकिन जुलाई अनुबंध वाली चांदी 179 रुपए घटकर 70,907 रुपए प्रति किलो पर कारोबार कर रही थी। अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बाजारों पर ध्यान दें तो न्यूयॉर्क मर्केंटाइल एक्सचेंज में अंतर्दिवसीय कारोबार में समाचार तैयार किए जाने तक सोना कमजोरी के साथ $1,980 30 सेंट प्रति औंस पर कारोबार कर रहा था। चांदी भी घटकर $23 13 सेंट प्रति औंस के आसपास चल रही थी।
On to other news now. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh today called upon industry leaders to come up with innovative solutions to help India become a leader from an imitator in futuristic technologies. He was addressing the annual session of the Confederation of Indian Industry in New Delhi. The theme of the session was futuristic frontiers, frontiers, competitiveness, technology, sustainability and internationalization. The minister asserted that in today's era, security equations are changing at an unprecedented pace and countries are focusing more than ever on technological advancements in the field of artificial intelligence, quantum computing and genetics. A quick comment, Jayanto. Instead of taking a technology transfer and copying it and manufacturing in India, don't you think we should, as the minister said, try and become an innovative leader?
Well, obviously that's there on the card, and there is no doubt in having any second thoughts. But what I do believe is innovation also comes in with huge investments in research, supporting research. And I think that's also where institutions who are involved in research in India, including state governments and central government, which are supporting such organizations, need a heavy infusion of funds.
जी, बस यहीं पर श्रोताओं की ओर से जयंतो हम आपको बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद देना चाहेंगे।
शुक्रिया।
And before we close, a quick look at the top stories. Key domestic indices end on a positive note in a highly volatile session. Sensex closes above 61,800 level, while Nifty settles above 18,300 mark. Rupee closes at 82 rupees and 74 paise against the US dollar, and Brent crude prices hover around $76.95 per barrel. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Market Mantra. From the entire team, thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye and have a pleasant evening.
Market Mantra.